Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome, I am Sister Who. I have a difficult subject to address today, and I guess the one disclaimer I'll offer is that everyone is encouraged to disagree if they wish, and if you wish to be a guest in a future episode and discuss your perspective on the subject, you're absolutely welcome to do so. Among the things I champion is that we should be able to always have civil dialogue and the freedom to disagree. A subject that's been on my mind a lot lately, law enforcement. The first incident of mine was a particular time when I was having problems with a neighbor who had two medium-sized dogs that were loose constantly and totally out of control and creating dangerous situations. And I called animal control and the law enforcement agency numerous times, and nobody seemed able to do anything. And one particular day, the dogs were loose again, and I was working in my front yard, and my dogs were in my fenced front yard with me. And one of the dogs came over and menaced my dogs through the fence, and I grabbed some citronella spray that I'd gotten from a local pet shop, which they said is what you spray at aggressive dogs to make them go away. And I sprayed the dog through the fence from inside my own yard, and the dog went away. And the people who owned the dog, who'd been reported numerous times for this violation and everything, and they called the law enforcement agency, and 5 minutes later I had someone showing up outside my driveway, accompanied by another person who I believe might have been a social worker, because I had also contacted the social service agency about this family, because I saw I witnessed a number of incidents in which a child in the family was wandering up and down the street making violent delusional comments. And I simply called them and said, there's a situation here that needs to be addressed. And to my great surprise, the social services agency immediately began treating me like a troublemaker. Instead of saying, thank you for alerting us to the situation, they begin questioning me as if, why are you trying to cause trouble for these people? And I said, I'm not. There's someone who's, this child who's wandering up and down the street without parental supervision, who's muttering all sorts of violent comments. What happened? And I said, well, the dog was loose again outside the fence. I sprayed the dog. Dog went away, and the officer kind of smirked and said, well, I'll go talk to him. About 20 minutes later, I was outside of my yard in the neighbor's driveway talking with the neighbor next door to me, and I was approached by 4 officers who surrounded me. It's like they were just absolutely ready for a fight. And I was looking around thinking to myself, what in the world is this? How ridiculous can they be? And they were absolutely, in the comments they were saying to me were very provocative, well, we don't want another problem to happen again. Well, as if I was the one causing it. So here I am, the wrongly accused citizen, surrounded by 4 officers who are trying to provoke a fight, wondering what in the world is going on. And what I basically discovered is there was no accountability. If you have trust with no accountability, people get victimized, because I was trusting officers to be honorable, and they weren't. And there was no accountability, nothing to require them to be or become honorable. And so I was victimized by the one who was breaking the law. It was a very bizarre situation, and I was unable to find any way of addressing it. That was one incident. My second incident was a particular car accident in which the vehicle I was driving. It was an old vehicle. As far as I knew, everything was fine. But I got out on the highway, and the front right ball joint separated, and the vehicle spun and slammed into the guardrail and slid to a stop. The miracle, I suppose, is that I didn't hit any other cars. I wasn't injured, and there was no significant property damage done. Some scrapes on the guardrail, but that was it. But my vehicle was towed. Well, I got out of the vehicle trying to figure out what in the world happened, because it took me a few minutes to figure out what the mechanical failure was. About 10 minutes later, a young officer showed up, and he immediately wanted to know, had I been drinking? No, I hadn't had a drop of alcohol in literally months. And, what was it? You were driving too fast. And I said, no, there was nobody around me. That's why there was no other car in the accident. He wanted to assign blame. He was being very aggressive about it. And I just said, well, it's just, I'm the only one. I wasn't hurt. There's no injuries. There's nobody at fault. There's nothing to make a case out of. It's just a mechanical failure. I just need my vehicle to go to my house, and then I can secure the money for the tow within the next 24 hours because I know exactly who I can call. No, if you don't have the money right this moment, we have to confiscate your vehicle. So I've just been in an accident where I could have been killed. I'm now having my vehicle taken away from me, so I have even less ability than before. The officer is making the situation worse and worse and worse, and then on top of it all, because I had, as far as I know, almost been killed and was a little emotionally unsettled, that has a way of doing that to you. He was getting really short-tempered with me being the least bit emotionally agitated. So I literally had to close my eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and exhale, and shift into a kind of non-emotional computer sort of mode, just answering questions and being factual. Because if I would have allowed myself to be human in that situation, the officer would have escalated the situation even more. He made that abundantly clear. As it was, because he couldn't let it drop, it wound up being a 2-month battle in court, at the end of which the judge shook his head over how ridiculous the whole thing was, and said that I was free to go. He could not rule against me, because the officer and the other parties involved in attempting to prosecute me simply didn't have the evidence or the arguments or the persuasion they needed to make a case. Unfortunately, I'm sure those are not the only 2 times that officers have acted badly. And because that fills a significant part of my experience, I have to be careful, or I try to be careful, I don't know how successful I am, that this does not bias me against all police officers, because so far the only 2 upfront encounters I've had with police officers have both been where they were victimizing me, and unjustifiably. I try to remember that every officer is an individual, and every person is an individual, and every situation that ever happens is as good or as bad as the individuals who are involved in it decide to be. The struggle I'm left with, though, is how, in the broader sense, on the level of basic wisdom, how do we create a collaborative, harmonious relationship with law enforcement in our communities? In the past, officers were sometimes referred to as peace officers rather than police officers. It was about keeping the peace, about protection. The motto that's been carried over through time is to serve and protect. But I really don't see in both of my cases, that's not at all what they were doing. They weren't serving and they weren't protecting. They were exacerbating crisis situations. For each of us, it is easy in the tumultuous events of life to lose focus and to get off track. And we need to have moments or ways of getting back to saying, whoa, wait a minute, what was the original focus? To serve and to protect. Okay, let's re-clarify how serve and protect applies to this situation. Let's all take a deep breath and calm down. It's easy to be emotional. That's not going to help. Maybe in accident situations, it would be good to have a professional empathizer show up along with the police officer, someone to help people who have been through difficult circumstances to take a deep breath, to calm down, to catch their breath, to be a little more factual and a little less emotional. Someone to provide grounding in those situations. Clearly in my circumstances, neither the police officer nor I was able to provide that very readily. It was only after I recognized what was happening and stopped myself and took a deep breath that I was able to get enough groundedness to deal constructively with the moment. The third incident I mentioned was news of a demonstration in which a large group of nonviolent demonstrators, who I'm not sure if they were really clear about what exactly they wanted or what exactly they were demonstrating against or how reasonable it was, but they weren't hurting anybody. They were simply there making a presence, trying to draw attention to something that really legitimately needed to be addressed. And there were some concerns, but to me they were really more minor. Are you blocking the sidewalk? Well, yes and no. I think the issue for which they were demonstrating was important enough that blocking the sidewalk was tolerable. And their request was to address an issue was certainly legitimate. I don't know that they had a clear idea of how the issue should be addressed, but over against them were police officers who had been charged with maintaining various, in my opinion, petty requirements. No loitering on this spot. No blocking the sidewalk, no trivial things that were not that difficult to work around and wasn't really causing that much of an issue for anybody. But the officers had been instructed that the demonstrators need to be removed. And in hearing an account of it, which granted was written by one of the demonstrators afterwards, but this is not a homeless person, this is not an uneducated juvenile delinquent, it's not about a lack of education, these were average citizens, intelligent people, respectful people, working people. They were not societal undesirables, if that term is even legitimate to use in this situation. They were completely respectable people, but they were devalued by the officers because the officers were told that the demonstrators need to leave. And as this person is writing this account afterwards, they said the thing that was most chilling about the whole incident was that the police officers were laughing as if they enjoyed threatening the demonstrators with violence and pulling out clubs and chasing them and driving fear into them and making them afraid of what might happen. And the only good thing I suppose I could say is that nobody got shot, unlike the incident back in the early 70s at Kent State in Indiana. But the notion that a police officer would be laughing about harassing and even assaulting peaceful demonstrators is very disturbing to me. I think if an officer cannot be emotionally impartial and calm and grounded while performing whatever duty has been assigned, then that person is unfit for duty. But the only way that kind of accountability can happen is if the citizens of the municipality or the state or whatever entity is involved require accountability. Not to say I'm going to tell you how to be a police officer in detail, because there's a huge amount of training that goes into being a police officer. But I still think it's within bounds to say that when you're on duty, especially in crisis situations, especially in confrontational situations, you are required to be dispassionate and grounded and level-headed and calm, and not allow your own emotions to exacerbate the situation. And if you find, you being the police officer, if a police officer finds that he is becoming too emotional, he needs to be able to say, time out, I need a break because I'm not able to do my best in this situation. I'm becoming too emotional. I'm becoming emotionally involved. I'm taking sides when I shouldn't be. I can't do my job the way my job needs to be done. The question, I suppose, becomes, what if all the police officers say that, and there's a situation that needs to be addressed? That's a discussion for the municipality, the city, the state, whatever group of people to have. What do we do if? In a broader sense, it seems to me the only reason we have a police force is because the citizens have abdicated a certain implied responsibility for taking care of each other. In a village situation in the past, if some horrendous incident like that happened, everybody would respond. It wouldn't be the police who responded, it would be the citizens who responded. If there were demonstrators who needed to be removed, and the majority or a significant percentage of the people in a city felt that it was time for them to leave, those people, ideally, should all show up and walk up to the demonstrators and say, we acknowledge what you've mentioned, we thank you for bringing it to our attention, we've heard you, now you need to go home because you're obstructing traffic and we need to get back to normal functioning here. If you'd like to continue this discussion, this is how and where we can do it. But now it's time for you to leave. And if you have 1,000 demonstrators faced with 3,000 calm, grounded citizens who say, now it's time for you to go home. The people of this city have heard you, we validate your concern, we will address it, now it's time for you to go home and clear the street. We wouldn't need the police at all. But by, in a sense, to use common or popular current jargon, outsourcing the enforcement of public civility to the police and abdicating their own involvement, miscommunications and wrong relationships can happen. To bring things back to a wise and loving center, citizens have to be willing to be involved and to show up. In this wonderful movie I saw, The Singing Revolution, about the move of the Estonian people from being a subject country of the former USSR to being an independent nation. They specifically did it non-violently, but they did it by all showing up. There was a particular political demonstration, for example, where fully 30% of the national population was there. 1 out of every 3 people in their country showed up. And I just, as I was watching that the first time, I thought, wow, if 1 out of every 3 people in my country showed up to address a wrong and make it right, there's no question that the wrong would be righted immediately. To the extent that we abdicate our responsibility as citizens of a democracy and don't show up and don't speak out and don't require accountability and don't require civility and calmness and focus and clarity. And, let's collect the testimony. Let's make an informed choice. Let's understand what lines we don't want to cross and how we're going to deal with any challenges that happen around that. Democracy can work, but only if the people are involved. And law enforcement in an ideal world will no longer be necessary. For the present time, it does seem to be necessary because things have just gotten too out of balance. But in order to do law enforcement the way it needs to be done, police officers need to return to being peace officers. And in those times when things get too emotional, it's time for them to take a time out and step out of the action, get calm, get grounded, and return to what they need to do in a dispassionate, factual, intelligent sort of way. Not with their own emotions, not seeking violence, not finding violence amusing, not finding confrontation amusing. If you find confrontation amusing, in my opinion, you could not possibly be an effective law enforcement officer. Because law enforcement is not about managing violence. It's about preventing violence. It is not about being the seed of violence. It is about being the seed of peace, being the seed of, being the facilitator of harmonious, mutually respectful, safe interactions. It is about recognizing when someone is driving too fast through a residential neighborhood and a real danger to pedestrians exists. It is about recognizing when someone is not being responsible and they need to be told in no uncertain terms that they will be responsible from this point on. And it's also about not making that one's entertainment or amusement, but simply making it the sacred trust, the responsibility with which one is entrusted and with which one deserves to be trusted because one is accountable to do the job correctly and not selfishly, narcissistically, or with any predisposition to violence. I would just like to end with a song I composed trying to get at these basic values of wisdom and love that to me would correct so many of the imbalances and evils and ills in life. From start to finish, from our birth to our death, if love and wisdom could be the two poles around which everything orients, so much else would fall into place. And so using an old Irish melody that's been used for quite a number of songs actually, this is the song I wrote, which I entitled Wisdom My Vision. Wisdom my vision, and love as my voice, this now and always I claim as my choice. Forgive my failings and frailty, I pray. In thy blessed presence may I live this new day. Hands of compassion and feet that can stand when fear and confusion reign throughout the land, committed to service and justice for all. Whatever I am now heeds thy deep inner call. Though unlike all others, yet part of all else, all things as family unto myself, the Spirit within every creature and thing is the breath of thy presence that moves me to sing. Many or few be My number of days may each be a witness to thy holy grace. May my mind's growing wisdom and my heart's growing love reveal the greatness of the holy above. When my spirit to spirit shall one day return, with memories of life and of all I have learned, may wisdom and love yet be vision and voice, and in my homecoming all heaven rejoice. And for now in my living all heaven rejoice.